You have probably never worried about freezing to death outside for more than an hour. Your ancestors didn't get that luxury. For most of human history, a bad winter could kill everyone you knew. And the way modern humans actually survived it isn't the story you were probably told. It wasn't fire alone. It wasn't thicker fur. Humans don't have thick fur. It came down to one tool, small enough to lose in a fold of hide, sharp enough to pierce bone. Around 50,000 years ago, in the mountains of southern Siberia, someone carved a needle out of a bird bone. Then they drilled a hole clean through one end. That hole is the whole story. Needles like it have turned up at several sites across that same stretch of Siberia. Researchers connected to the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography in Novosibirsk have studied them for years. They're thinner than a matchstick, and somehow they survived tens of thousands of years buried in cave sediment. Each one is a small piece of evidence for something much bigger than a sewing kit. Before that needle existed, clothing meant draping a raw animal skin over your shoulders and hoping the wind didn't find the gaps. After it existed, clothing meant something else entirely. It meant layers. Fabric shaped to a body, sewn tight at the wrists and the ankles, sealed against a world that wanted you dead. Your ancestors weren't the only humans in Ice Age Europe. Neanderthals were already there. They had survived cold winters for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans ever showed up. So why did one group make it through the coldest stretch of the Ice Age and the other didn't? The archaeologist Mark Collard and his colleagues tried to answer that, not by studying bones, by studying tools. They compared the animal remains found at Neanderthal sites with the remains found at early modern human sites across Ice Age Europe. At Neanderthal sites, the bones mostly came from animals whose hides make good simple wraps, the kind you drape and pin. At modern human sites, something changed. There were more remains from animals with fur suited to fitted, insulated garments, the kind that requires cutting, shaping, and sewing. That shift lines up almost exactly with the appearance of eyed needles in the record. It's not proof on its own, but it's a pattern that keeps showing up, site after site. Modern humans weren't just wearing skins. They were building something closer to a wearable shelter. It helps to understand why Neanderthals didn't need that shift as badly, at least not at first. Their bodies were already built for cold in a way modern human bodies weren't. Shorter limbs, a stockier frame, a build that held heat close to the core instead of losing it at the edges. For a long time, that body plan alone may have been enough, but bodies adapt slowly across many generations. A stretch of unpredictable Ice Age weather can turn deadly within a single season. Modern humans didn't have hundreds of thousands of years to slowly reshape their limbs for the cold. So instead of waiting on evolution, they solved it with their hands. A much faster kind of adaptation. Here's where it gets stranger. The anthropologist Ian Gilligan has spent much of his career studying the evolution of clothing. He argues this shift wasn't a minor convenience. He treats clothing as a technology on the same level as fire, something that let a tropical-bodied species colonize climates it was never built for. Humans evolved in warm parts of Africa with skin built to release heat, not trap it. Without an outer layer doing the job fur normally does, a human body starts losing that battle within minutes in serious Ice Age cold. So the needle wasn't decoration. It was the difference between a body that could regulate its own temperature and one that had to build that regulation from the outside in. That's the reframe worth sitting with. Your ancestors didn't outlast the Ice Age because they were tougher. They outlasted it because they figured out how to stop needing to be tougher. Move north from Siberia toward the plains of what is now Russia, and the evidence gets even more specific. At a site called Sungir, excavated decades ago and studied since by researchers including the anthropologist Randall White, archaeologists found burials dating back roughly 34,000 years. The bodies were covered in thousands of small ivory beads. At first glance, that looks like jewelry. And it partly was, but the beads weren't scattered randomly across the skeletons. They were arranged in rows that only make sense if they were once sewn onto fitted clothing, tracing the outline of sleeves, trousers, and a hood. Whoever prepared those bodies for burial dressed them the same way they had dressed for the cold every single day of their lives. That's not a symbolic detail. That's a wardrobe, preserved by accident, tens of thousands of years after the last stitch was sewn. Think about how strange that is. Nobody meant to leave clothing behind for archaeologists to find. Cloth and hide rot away within a few centuries under most conditions. Almost nothing survives for researchers to study directly. The only reason anyone today knows what an Ice Age outfit looked like comes down to one lucky detail. The beads sewn onto it happen to be made of a material that doesn't decay. Every other detail of daily survival, the songs, the routines, the small decisions made every freezing morning, is gone completely. What's left is a kind of accidental photograph, made of ivory instead of light, showing exactly where the seams once ran. Now here's the twist that tends to surprise people. You'd expect the harshest cold to be where clothing technology first became critical. And in one sense, that's true. But researchers studying this shift have found something odd. Some of the earliest and most sophisticated tailoring evidence doesn't come from the coldest, most extreme sites. It comes from regions with serious seasonal swings. Places where summer could be mild and winter could turn brutal within weeks. The theory is that unpredictable cold, not constant cold, is what forces real innovation. A body that faces the same mild cold every day can get by on habit and a thick wrap. A body that faces wild temperature swings has to build something adjustable, something it can layer, loosen, and seal depending on the day. In other words, the instability of the climate may be what pushed the needle into existence in the first place. Your ancestors weren't just reacting to how cold it got. They were reacting to how much the cold kept changing on them. Think about what that meant for daily survival. A hunter heading out at dawn couldn't check a forecast. Clothing that could be adjusted, tightened, or shed as the day warmed and cooled again wasn't a luxury. It was the only way to leave camp at all, without gambling your life on the weather holding steady. That single bone needle, repeated across generations, is arguably one of the reasons modern humans could follow herds and resources deep into hostile country. Neanderthals, by contrast, mostly couldn't sustain a population there for long. Reindeer, mammoth, and other cold-adapted animals moved across huge ranges as the seasons shifted. Whoever could follow them the farthest, for the longest stretch of the year, got first access to food when everyone else was struggling. Fitted, sealed clothing meant a hunting party could stay out longer, travel farther, and push into territory that would otherwise have been a death sentence within days. Over enough generations, that small logistical edge compounds into something much larger. It becomes the difference between a population confined to a narrow, forgiving strip of land and one that spreads across an entire continent. It's easy to imagine the Ice Age being one with spears and fire. The quieter truth is that it may have been one with a needle and thread made from sinew. Stitch by stitch, in some of the coldest places, a human body had ever tried to survive. You still carry a version of that same solution every single day. The layered jacket in your closet, the fitted base layer, the sealed cuffs that keep wind out, all of it descends from the same basic insight. Your ancestors reached that insight with nothing more than a sliver of bird bone. Outdoor brands now spend enormous amounts of money researching seam placement and insulation ratios, chasing the exact same problem someone was already solving with sinew thread on the Siberian steppe. The materials changed. The stitching got finer, but the underlying idea that a shaped, sealed, adjustable layer can turn a fatal climate into a survivable one hasn't changed even slightly. You just don't have to carve the tool yourself anymore. Somewhere in a Siberian cave, a piece of technology smaller than your finger quietly decided who got to keep expanding across a freezing continent and who didn't. That's how they actually survived it, not by being stronger than the cold, by outsmarting it, one stitch at a time. So here's a question worth sitting with. If a single needle could decide which humans made it through the Ice Age, what everyday object in your life right now might future researchers point to the same way? The quiet reason your generation survived something you don't even think of as a threat. It's a strange kind of comfort, Knowing the difference between surviving and not surviving has rarely come down to raw strength. More often, it's come down to some small, unglamorous piece of problem solving that nobody at the time thought was history in the making. A bird bone. A hole drilled through one end. A thread of sinew pulled tight against the cold. Nobody carving that needle by firelight thought they were deciding the future of a species. They were just trying to survive the night in front of them. And somewhere else in the Ice Age record, another group faced that same freezing world with almost none of these tools. What happened to them is a very different story. Drop your guess below. What modern object do you think future generations will look back on the same way?